Hello, hello, hello. Sorry. It always takes me a million years to get ready for the stream. I have to put my makeup on, I have to do my hair, I have to put my jewelry on, and it takes more than 15 minutes. Plus, I had to eat and do my laundry and do a million other things before the stream. So, I don't know why. It takes me forever to get to do anything. It's kind of frustrating. Okay. Hi. Hello, fellow witches and wizards. My name is PhoenixGinny, and welcome to the stream. Welcome to Storytime Saturday number 10. And we are finally getting back to Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Okay. Wow, I feel really hot. I was just straightening my hair, which doesn't look like I did at all, because that's usually how that goes. And yeah, wow, it's been a really long time since we've done this. Been 3 or 4 weeks or so, something like that. But we are getting back into it. It's going to be a good time. It's much brighter out now. The days are longer now that it's April. It's in the 70s today. Can't believe it. First day I'm wearing shorts today. Lovely, lovely weather. Hopefully it rains. Hopefully it rains, though, because we need it. Okay. Hi. If you're new, I encourage you to join the chat in the comment section right over there. And if you're watching the video after the fact, please comment down below. Please leave a like on the stream. Tells YouTube that you like it. Just click the little thumbs up button below the screen. Even if you're watching the stream after the fact, it's no longer live, it's still helpful. And if you would like more content like this, please click subscribe and click the notification bell right next to it so you can be notified the next time I go live and the next time I upload. I will be going live. I live stream every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday here on YouTube at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Thursday, I'll be streaming The Sims 4, Nifty Knitting, and I will be building, I believe. I will be building, my Sims are getting married, so I'm going to build a vacation house for them to spend their honeymoon at. I just finished their church. I just built their church. That is on my channel right now if you'd like to see that. It's also on the gallery if you play The Sims 4 and you would like a nice church-like wedding venue. It is on the gallery. If you want to, my gallery ID is at PhoenixGinny, capital P, no longer capital G. I messed that up and switched the E and O around. If you want to see that church, click the box that includes custom content, because it does have a few custom content items in it. But we're not here about The Sims. I stream The Sims 4 on Thursdays. I stream adventure games or whatever kind of game that's not The Sims 4 on Friday. And we're currently working on, we're going to start Sherlock Holmes, The Testament of Sherlock on Friday. And then Saturday, of course, my Storytime Saturdays, where we'll be reading more Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. It's been a while, and springtime is a very exciting time, especially for Harry Potter fans, because May 2nd is actually a holiday for us. May 2nd is the Battle of Hogwarts Day. I don't know if they call it that. I don't know what they call it. I've always called it the battle. It's the day that the Battle of Hogwarts happened in Deathly Hallows. It's May 2nd. And I'm actually celebrating by having a Harry Potter marathon. I encourage you guys to do the same. I will be watching all 8 Harry Potter movies in 24 hours. Scary? Sounds impossible, but it's not. I've done it. If you start at 4 a.m., and you watch one movie after the other, you skip the credits, you skip commercials, and you have your meals and bathroom breaks during the film, you can watch 1 through 8 all the way up till just about midnight. 11:30, 11:45 you'll finish, depending on how quickly you switch your discs and if anything happens to interrupt. It's so fun. I'm doing it May 2nd on Sunday, May 2nd. And it'd be really cool if you guys would do this. It's a suggestion if you guys want to do that too, because that's really, really fun. I wish I could do it literally with you guys. That would be awesome. But I don't have a way of doing that. It would be cool to do like a Hulu watch party kind of thing, but my Hulu subscription has ads, and I can't watch ads. If I'm going to make it till from 4 a.m. to midnight, I can't have ads. So, and I can't afford to have Hulu without ads. And you have to have a limited amount of people on your watch party, and they all have to be Hulu subscribers. And I don't even know if only certain movies are available for watch parties, and I don't know if the Harry Potter movies are available. I believe the Harry Potter movies are on Hulu. I feel like they advertised that recently. But anyway, I don't even know if they're available for watch parties. Anyway, we can have a pretend watch party. We'll watch it together in spirit. That's what we'll do. But, okay. Anything new and interesting? I don't know. Not really. Just the fact that it's been a really long time since we've done this. But we are on chapter 2. And hopefully you can hear me okay. Hello. Perfect. Okay, that should be fine. Okay, good. Okay. I will read chapter 2. Dobby's warning. I'm going to take a drink first. My water. Okay. Harry managed not to shout out, but it was a close thing. I forgot to mention. I haven't done this in so long that I forgot to say certain things that I always say. Is there anything else? Follow me on Twitter, link in the description, that gives you information about the streams and stuff. But also, if you haven't been here before and you don't know what we do here, this isn't a strict audiobook. I do commentary, so I will comment on the different things I've read, and which means there will probably be spoilers because I'll make references to future books and the movies and games, the plays, anything. So if you don't want spoilers for anything, I suggest you watch something else. But yeah, it's not an audiobook. That is the point I'm trying to make. Okay. Now I'll read. The little creature on the bed had large bat-like ears and bulging green eyes the size of tennis balls. Harry knew instantly that this was what had been watching him out of the garden hedge that morning. As they stared at each other, Harry heard Dudley's voice from the hall. "May I take your coats, Mr. and Mrs. Mason?" The creature slipped off the bed and bowed so low that the end of his long, thin nose touched the carpet. Harry noticed that it was wearing what looked like an old pillowcase with rips for arms and leg holes. Why would there need to be rips for leg holes? Don't all pillowcases have like an opening to put the pillow in? According to the picture, that's the way it is. Yeah, it's an opening at the bottom. Doesn't need rips for leg holes. Hello? Said Harry nervously. "Harry Potter," said the creature in a high-pitched voice Harry was sure would carry down the stairs. "So long has Dobby wanted to meet you, sir. Such an honor it is." "Thank you," said Harry, edging along the wall and sinking into his desk chair next to Hedwig, who was asleep in her large cage. He wanted to ask, "What are you?" but thought it would sound too rude, so instead he said, "Who are you?" "Dobby, sir. Just Dobby. Dobby, the house elf. There's a hyphen in elf." I'm going to fix that real quick. In my description, I put, "Now is the best time to have a house elf in our bedroom," because in the movie, I don't know if he says it in the book. I don't think he does. In the movie, he's like, not to be rude or anything, but this isn't a great time to have a house elf in my bedroom. So then I put, now is the best time to have a house elf in our bedroom. But we're going to put a hyphen there, because punctuation is important, people. Okay, I fixed it. Said the creature. Oh, really? Said Harry. Oh, he does say it. I don't want to be rude or anything, but this isn't a great time for me to have a house elf in my bedroom. Aunt Petunia's high, false laugh sounded from the living room. The elf hung his head. Not that I'm not pleased to meet you, said Harry quickly, but, is there any particular reason you're here? Oh, yes, sir, said Dobby earnestly. Dobby has come to tell you, sir. It is difficult, sir. Dobby wonders where to begin. Sit down, said Harry politely, pointing at the bed. To his horror, the elf burst into tears, very noisy tears. Sit down, he wailed. Never, never, ever. Harry thought he heard the voices downstairs falter. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to offend you or anything. Offend Dobby? choked the elf. Dobby has never been asked to sit down by a wizard. Like an equal. Harry tried to say, Shush! and looked comforting at the same time, ushered Dobby back onto the bed where he sat hiccuping. Hiccoughing. Is that how you say that? Looking like a large and very ugly doll. At last he managed to control himself and sat with his great eyes fixed on Harry in an expression of watery adoration. Da. He can't have met many decent wizards, said Harry, trying to cheer him up. Dobby shook his head. Then, without warning, he leapt up and started banging his head furiously on the window, shouting, Bad Dobby! Bad Dobby! Don't! What are you doing? Harry hissed, springing up and pulling Dobby back onto the bed. Hedwig had woken up with a particularly loud screech and was beating her wings wildly against the bars of her cage. Dobby had to punish himself, sir, said the elf, who had gone slightly cross-eyed. Dobby almost spoke ill of his family, sir. Your family? The wizard family Dobby serves, sir. Dobby is a house elf, bound to serve 101 family for 100. What am I saying? Bound to serve one house and one family forever. Do they know you're here? Asked Harry curiously. Dobby shuddered. Oh no, they'd kill him if he knew he was there. Dobby! Oh my gosh. It's so small. Oh no, sir, no. Dobby will have to punish himself most grievously for coming to see you, sir. Dobby will have to shut his ears in the oven door for this, if they ever knew, sir. But won't they notice if you shut your ears in the oven door? Dobby doubts it, sir. Dobby is always having to punish himself for something, sir. They lets Dobby get on with it, sir. Sometimes they reminds me to do extra punishments. But why don't you leave? Escape. A house elf must be set free, sir, and the family will never set Dobby free. Dobby will serve the family until he dies, sir. Harry stared. And I thought I had it bad staying here for another 4 weeks, he said. Puts it in perspective. I'm sorry. My mascara is in my eyes. Help. Help me. I'm dying. He said, This makes the Dursleys sound almost human. Can't anyone help you? Can't I? Almost at once Harry wished he hadn't spoken. Dobby dissolved again into wails of gratitude. See, if Harry had grown up in the wizarding world, he wouldn't have questioned Dobby's behavior. But then again, if he had grown up in the Wizarding World, Harry wouldn't have nearly the compassion that he does because he doesn't come with those prejudices. Please, Harry whispered frantically, please be quiet. If the Dursleys hear anything, if they know you're here, Harry Potter asks if he can help Dobby. Dobby has heard of your greatness, sir, but of your goodness Dobby never knew. And that's what makes Harry great, is his goodness. Harry, who was feeling distinctly hot in the face, said, whatever you've heard about my greatness is a load of rubbish. I'm not even top of my year at Hogwarts. That's Hermione. She... But he stopped quickly, because thinking about Hermione was painful. Harry Potter is humble and modest, said Dobby reverently, his orb-like eyes aglow. Harry Potter speaks not of his triumph over he who must not be named. Voldemort? Said Harry. Dobby clapped his ears over his bat ears and moaned. Ah, speak not the name, sir, speak not the name. Sorry, said Harry quickly. I know lots of people don't like it. My friend Ron... He stopped again. Thinking about Ron was painful, too. Dobby leaned toward Harry, his eyes wide as headlights. Dobby heard tell, he said hoarsely, that Harry Potter met the Dark Lord for a second time, just weeks ago. That Harry Potter escaped yet again. Harry nodded, and Dobby's eyes suddenly shone with tears. Ah, sir, he gasped, dabbing his face with a corner of the grubby pillowcase he was wearing. Harry Potter is valiant and bold. He has braved so many dangers already. But Dobby has come to protect Harry Potter, to warn him. Even if he does have to shut his ears in the oven door later, Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts. Yeah. Harry is sort of like a savior, a mythical savior, or literal savior, to creatures such as Dobby, to the house elves, and the creatures who have had a raw deal in the Wizarding World. And so that's why Dobby feels the need to protect Harry Potter, not just because Dobby's a good person, because he certainly is, but he's saving the savior of the world in his mind. Dobby is their savior in his mind, in his perspective. So he's saving Harry so that Harry can save them. Let's check something. Okay. Alright. There was a silence broken only by the chink of knives and forks from downstairs and the distant rumble of Uncle Vernon's voice. Whoa, what? Harry stammered. But I've got to go back. Term starts on September 1st. It's all that's keeping me going. You don't know what it's like here. I don't belong here. I belong in your world, at Hogwarts. No, 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 squeaked Dobby, shaking his head so hard his ears flapped. Harry Potter must stay where he is safe. He is too great, too good to lose. If Harry Potter goes back to Hogwarts, he will be in mortal danger. Harry should have just lied. He should have been like, you know what? You're right. I won't go. Thanks for warning me. Bye. Things would have gotten much better for him if he had just lied. Why? Said Harry in surprise. There is a plot, Harry Potter. A plot to make most terrible things happen at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry this year, whispered Dobby, suddenly trembling all over. Dobby has known it for months, sir. Harry Potter must not put himself in peril. He is too important, sir. What terrible things? Said Harry at once. Who's plotting them? Dobby made a funny choking noise and then banged his head frantically against the wall. I doubt that... Oh, spoiler alert! The family Dobby serves is the Malfoys. I don't think the Malfoys would have told Dobby to not speak of it, but I think it was an implied order. Obviously, it would be counter counteractive for their plans if Dobby were to speak about them. I wonder if that's how it would go. Would you have to... I forget. Don't you have to be specific about house elf orders? I think only sometimes. I think it's only in certain situations that you have to be specific. Because house elves still have free will, and so house elves are able to determine what rules to take literally. I'm just thinking about Creature in Order of the Phoenix. Sirius Black told him to get out. And of course what he meant was get out of the room. He didn't mean get out of the house. And I think that was the implied understanding. But because Creature didn't like him, he chose to interpret the order in the way he wanted to. And so he literally left the house to go seek the Lestranges. Or the Malfoys, or wherever he went. I know that he went to Bellatrix, but who knows if he went literally to Bellatrix's place, or if he went to the Malfoys. I don't know. But I think because Creature didn't like Sirius and didn't like the way that he treated him, he chose to interpret the rules differently. Dobby is an altogether different house elf. Dobby actually wants to follow orders. He just hates he dislikes the people that he works for, but at the same time, he's also loyal, no matter who his family is, whereas Creature kind of looks out for himself. And so I think Dobby, even though it's possible that the Malfoys didn't give him strict instructions not to tell their secret, he feels duty-bound to them anyway, even though they mistreat him. I think. That's just theory. I don't really know much about the subject. Maybe they'll talk about it later. "All right," cried Harry, grabbing the elf's arm to stop him. "You can't tell me. I understand. But why are you warning me?" A sudden, unpleasant thought struck him. "Hang on. This hasn't got anything to do with with you-know-who, has it? You could just shake or nod," he added hastily as Dobby's head tilted worryingly close to the wall again. Slowly, Dobby shook his head. Not he who must not be named, sir." But Dobby's eyes were wide, and he seemed to be trying to give Harry a hint. Harry, however, was completely lost, as usual. Dobby is like... Dobby reveals later. Harry gets upset. Harry confronts Dobby later with I thought you said it didn't have anything to do with Voldemort, but Voldemort was the heir Slytherin, and it was Voldemort's diary that they found. But Dobby, I think Dobby makes the point that I said it wasn't about he who must not be named. I didn't say it wasn't about Tom Riddle. I think his point was, it's about Voldemort before he became Voldemort, so technically he was still telling the truth. I think he was trying to give Harry a hint that it's about Voldemort before he became Voldemort, but Harry doesn't know that there is a Voldemort before he was Voldemort. He has no idea, so he would be lost. He hasn't got a brother, has he? That would be one miserable individual. Well, yeah. I don't know why I put that, though. That's what I wrote here in my book. He would be, if he would be alive. I'm just trying to think of what the implications would be. I don't know how Merope would be able to have another kid. I guess she could have. I don't know if it would change the story all that much if Voldemort had a brother. He would probably be dead, though. I don't think Voldemort probably would have killed him. Because that's what Voldemort does. I don't know. Dobby shook his head, his eyes wider than ever. "Well, then, I can't think who else would have had a chance of making horrible things happen at Hogwarts," said Harry. "I mean, there's Dumbledore, for one thing. You know who Dumbledore is, don't you?" Dobby bowed his head. "Albus Dumbledore is the greatest headmaster Hogwarts has ever had," Dobby knows it, sir. Dobby has heard Dumbledore's powers rival those of he who must not be named at the height of his strength. But, sir, Dobby's voice dropped to an urgent whisper, there are powers Dumbledore doesn't. Powers no decent wizard. Horcruxes. But how would he know that? See, I wrote this. I wrote Horcruxes down there because there are powers that Dumbledore doesn't know, not because he can't know them, not because he's not strong enough, but because he's too good to know them. Actually, that was said in the first one. McGonagall said that to Dumbledore. Dumbledore said about Dumbledore's talking to Professor McGonagall, and he said, even he has powers that I don't have. And then McGonagall says, well, that's because you're too noble to use them. You're too good to use those powers. Yeah. And I'm thinking Horcruxes, but how would Dobby know about the Horcruxes? Because there's no way in hell does Lucius Malfoy know about Voldemort's Horcruxes. Because if he did, he would never have put that diary in Ginny Weasley's cauldron. Ever, 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 if he knew what that was. Oh man, he'd be kicking himself if he knew what that was. He still doesn't know, probably. Oh man. And Dumbledore says that too. He says Malfoy has no idea what that was. How would he know? So then maybe these powers that Dumbledore doesn't know or have, maybe they're in reference to something else, not the Horcruxes. Because how would Dobby know? Because Lucius doesn't know. How would Dobby know when Lucius not know, is my point. And before Harry could stop him, Dobby bounded off the bed, seized Harry's desk lamp, and started beating himself around the head with ear-splitting yelps. A sudden silence fell downstairs. 2 seconds later, Harry, heart thudding madly, heard Uncle Vernon coming into the hall, calling, "Dudley must have left his television on again, the little tyke." "Quick, in the closet!" hissed Harry, stuffing Dobby in, shutting the door, and flinging himself onto the bed just as the door handle turned. "Quick, at casual!" "What the devil are you doing?" said Uncle Vernon through gritted teeth, his face horribly close to Harry's. "You've just ruined the punchline of my Japanese golfer joke. One more sound, and you'll wish you'd never been born, boy." Harry's so good, he's unintentionally stopping racism. Well, I guess it's Dobby, technically. Dobby wouldn't be there if it weren't for Harry, though. He stomped flat-footed from the room. Shaking, Harry let Dobby out of the closet. "See what it's like here?" he said. "See why I've got to go back to Hogwarts? It's the only place I've got... Well, I think I've got friends. Friends who don't even write to Harry Potter?" said Dobby slyly. "I expect they've just been... Wait a minute," said Harry, frowning. "How do you know my friends haven't been writing to me?" Dobby shuffled his feet. "Harry Potter mustn't be angry with Dobby. Dobby did it for the best. Have you been stopping my letters?" "Dobby has them here, sir," said the elf, stepping nimbly out of Harry's reach. He pulled a thick wad of envelopes from the inside of the pillowcase he was wearing. Harry could make out Hermione's neat writing, Ron's untidy scrawl, and even a scribble that looked as though it was from the Hogwarts gamekeeper, Hagrid. Dobby blinked anxiously up at Harry. Harry Potter mustn't be angry. Dobby hoped. If Harry Potter thought his friends had forgotten him, Harry Potter might not want to go back to school, sir. Harry wasn't listening. He made a grab for the letters, but Dobby jumped out of reach. "Harry Potter will have them, sir, if he gives Dobby his word that he will not return to Hogwarts. Ah, sir, this is a danger you must not face. Say you won't go back, sir." "No," said Harry angrily. "Give me my friend's letters." "Then Harry Potter leaves Dobby no choice," said the elf sadly. Before Harry could move, Dobby had darted to the bedroom door, pulled it open, and sprinted down the stairs. Mouth dry, stomach lurching, Harry sprang after him, trying not to make a sound. He jumped the last 6 steps. Without making a sound? That's not possible. I'm funny. And then in the margins of that, see, I noted, trying not to make a sound, he jumped the last 6 steps. I wrote, that would be counterproductive, sir, in the margin, which is a reference to a line that Harry says in the movie Half-Blood Prince. Because there's no way that he jumped the last 6 steps without making a sound. Landing cat-like on the hall carpet, looking around for Dobby. From the dining room he heard Uncle Vernon saying, Tell Petunia that very funny story about those American plumbers, Mr. Mason. She's been dying to hear. Harry ran up the hall into the kitchen and felt his stomach disappear. Aunt Petunia's masterpiece of a pudding, the mountain of cream and sugared violets, was floating up near the ceiling. On top of a cupboard in the corner crouched Dobby. No, croaked Harry. Please, they'll kill me. Harry Potter must say he's not going back to school. Dobby, please, say it, sir. I can't. Dobby gave him a tragic look. Then Dobby must do it, sir, for Harry Potter's own good. The pudding fell to the floor with a heart-stopping crash. Cream splattered the windows and walls as the dish shattered. With a crack like a whip, Dobby vanished. There were screams from the dining room, and Uncle Vernon burst into the kitchen to find Harry, rigid with shock, covered from head to foot in Aunt Petunia's pudding. At first, it looked as though Uncle Vernon would manage to gloss the whole thing over. Just our nephew. Very disturbed. Meeting strangers upsets him, so he kept him upstairs. He shooed the shocked Masons back into the dining room, promised Harry he would fillet him to within an inch of his life when the Masons had left, and handed him a mop. Aunt Petunia's dug some ice cream out of the freezer, and Harry, still shaking, started scrubbing the kitchen clean. Uncle Vernon might still have been able to make his deal, if it hadn't been for the owl. Aunt Petunia was just passing around a box of after-dinner mints when a huge barn owl swooped through the dining room window, dropped a letter on Mrs. Mason's head, and swooped out again. Mrs. Mason screamed like a banshee and ran from the house, shouting about lunatics. Mr. Mason stayed just long enough to tell the Dursleys that his wife was mortally afraid of birds of all shapes and sizes, and to ask whether this was their idea of a joke. Harry stood in the kitchen, clutching the mop for support as Uncle Vernon advanced on him, a demonic glint in his tiny eyes. "Read it," he hissed evilly, brandishing the letter the owl had delivered. "Go on, read it." Harry took it. It did not contain birthday greetings. Oh no. I can hear Mafalda Hopkirk's voice. From Order of the Phoenix. Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that a hover charm was used at your place of residence this evening at 9:12. As you know, underage wizards are not permitted to perform spells outside school. A further spell work on your part may lead to expulsion from said school. Decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, 1875, paragraph C. We would also ask you to remember that any magical activity that risks notice by members of the non-magical community, Muggles, is a serious offense under Section 13 of the International Confederation of Warlocks Statute of Secrecy. Enjoy your holidays. Yours sincerely, Mafalda Hopkirk. Improper use of magic office, Ministry of Magic. Harry looked up from the letter and gulped. You didn't tell us you weren't allowed to use magic outside school, said Uncle Vernon, a mad gleam dancing in his eyes. Forgot to mention it. Slipped your mind, I dare say. He was bearing down on Harry like a great bulldog, all his teeth bared. Well, I've got news for you, boy. I'm locking you up. You're never going back to that school. Never. And if you try and magic yourself out, they'll expel you. And laughing like a maniac, he dragged Harry back upstairs. Uncle Vernon was as bad as his word. The following morning, he paid a man to fit bars on Harry's window. If this isn't child abuse, I don't know what is. Get the SVU on this. Dun dun. I've been watching Law & Order SVU. So it's kind of in my head. I finished Criminal Minds, so I gotta move on to the next criminal something show. So he himself fitted a cat flap in the bedroom door so that small amounts of food could be passed inside 3 times a day. They let Harry out to use the bathroom morning and evening. Otherwise, he was locked in his room around the clock. That's child abuse. That's unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. Not okay. Three days later, the Dursleys were showing no signs of relenting, and Harry couldn't see any way out of his situation. He lay on his bed, watching the sun sinking behind the bars on the window, and wondered miserably what was going to happen to him. What was the good of magicking himself out of his room if Hogwarts would expel him for doing it? Yet life at Privet Drive had reached an all-time low. Now that the Dursleys knew they weren't going to wake up as fruit bats, he had lost his only weapon. Dobby might have saved Harry from horrible happenings at Hogwarts, but the way things were going, he'd probably starve to death anyway. The cat flap rattled, and Aunt Petunia's hand appeared, pushing a bowl of canned soup into the room. Harry, whose insides were aching with hunger, jumped off his bed and seized it. The soup was stone cold, but he drank half of it in one gulp. Then he crossed the room to Hedwig's cage and tipped the soggy vegetables at the bottom of the bowl into her empty food tray. She ruffled her feathers and gave him a look of deep disgust. "It's no good turning your beak up at it. That's all we've got," said Harry grimly. He put the empty bowl back on the floor next to the cat flap and lay back down on the bed, somehow even hungrier than he had been before the soup. Supposing he was still alive in another 4 weeks, what would happen if he didn't turn up at Hogwarts? Would someone be sent to see why he hadn't come back? Would they be able to make the Dursleys let him go? Of course, honey. Of course they would. They wouldn't just leave you there, I promise. Dumbledore wouldn't hear of it. The room was growing dark. Exhausted, stomach rumbling, mind spinning over the same unanswerable questions, Harry fell into an uneasy sleep. He dreamed that he was on show in a zoo, with a card-reading underage wizard attached to his cage. People goggled through the bars at him as he lay, starving and weak, on a bed of straw. He saw Dobby's face in the crowd and shouted out, asking for help, but Dobby called, "Harry Potter is safe there, sir," and vanished. Then the Dursleys appeared, and Dudley rattled the bars of the cage, laughing at him. "Stop it," Harry muttered as the rattling pounded in his sore head. "Leave me alone. Cut it out. I'm trying to sleep." He opened his eyes. Moonlight was shining through the bars on the window, and someone was goggling through the bars at him. A freckled-faced, red-haired, long-nosed someone. Ron Weasley was outside Harry's window. Yay! Someone is coming to rescue him. I wonder if I should pull my camera down. Adjustments. Okay. Alright, so that is chapter 2. And we will read chapter 3. It's a good bit. It's a good length. Okay, so as customary, I will take my 15-minute break in between chapters, gives my voice a rest. So now's a good time to get up, stretch, get a drink, get a snack, use the restroom, do what you gotta do, and I will be back in 15 minutes. Welcome back, fellow witches and wizards. Now it is time to read Chapter 3, The Burrow. Ron, breathed Harry, creeping to the window and pushing it up so they could talk through the bars. Ron, how did you... What the... Harry's mouth fell open as the full impact of what he was seeing hit him. Ron was leaning out of the back window of an old turquoise car which was parked in mid-air. Grinning at Harry from the front seats were Fred and George, Ron's elder twin brothers. "All right, Harry," asked George. "What's been going on?" said Ron. "Why haven't you been answering my letters? I've asked you to stay about 12 times, and then Dad came home and said you got an official warning for using magic in front of muggles. It wasn't me. And how did he know?" "He works for the ministry," said Ron. "You know you're not supposed to use spells outside school." "You should talk," said Harry, staring at the floating car. "Oh, this doesn't count," said Ron. "We're only borrowing this. It's Dad's. We didn't enchant it. But doing magic in front of those muggles you live with, I told you I didn't. But it'll take too long to explain now. Look, can you tell them at Hogwarts that the Dursleys have locked me up and won't let me come back? And obviously I can't magic myself out, because the ministry will think that's the second spell I've done in 3 days, so..." "Stop gibbering," said Ron. "We've come to take you home with us." "But you can't magic me out either. We don't need to," said Ron, jerking his head toward the front seat and grinning. "You forgot who I've got with me." "Tie that around the bars," said Fred, throwing the end of a rope to Harry. "If the Dursleys wake up, I'm dead," said Harry, as he tied the rope tightly around a bar and Fred revved up the car. "Don't worry," said Fred, "and stand back." Harry moved back into the shadows next to Hedwig, who seemed to have realized how important this was, and kept still and silent. The car revved louder and louder, and suddenly, with a crunching noise, the bars were pulled clean out of the window as Fred drove straight up in the air. Harry ran back to the window to see the bars dangling a few feet above the ground. Panting, Ron hoisted them up into the car. Harry listened anxiously, but there was no sound from the Dursleys' bedroom. When the bars were safely in the back seat with Ron, Fred reversed as close as possible to Harry's window. "Get in," Ron said. "But all my Hogwarts stuff, my wand, my broomstick, where is it?" "Locked in the cupboard under the stairs, and I can't get out of this room." "No problem," said George from the front passenger seat. "Out of the way, Harry." Fred and George climbed cat-like through the window into Harry's room. You had to hand it to them, thought Harry, as George took an ordinary hairpin from his pocket and started to pick the lock. "A lot of wizards think it's a waste of time, knowing this sort of muggle trick," said Fred, "but we feel their skills worth learning, even if they are a bit slow." There was a small click, and the door swung open. "So, we'll get your trunk. You grab anything you need from your room and hand it out to Ron," whispered George. "Watch out for the bathroom stair. Not the bathroom. Watch out for the bottom stair. It creaks," Harry whispered, back as the twins disappeared onto the dark landing. Harry dashed around the room, collecting his things and passing them out of the window to Ron. Then he went to help Fred and George heave his trunk up the stairs. Harry heard Uncle Vernon cough. At last, panting, they reached the landing, then carried the trunk through Harry's room to the open window. Fred climbed back into the car to pull with Ron, and Harry and George pushed from the bedroom side. Inch by inch, the trunk slid through the window. Uncle Vernon coughed again. "A bit more," panted Fred, who was pulling from inside the car. "One good push." Harry and George threw their shoulders against the trunk, and it slid out of the window into the back seat of the car. "Okay, let's go," George whispered. But as Harry climbed onto the windowsill, there came a sudden loud screech from behind him, followed immediately by the thunder of Uncle Vernon's voice. "That ruddy owl!" "I've forgotten Hedwig." Harry tore back across the room as the landing light clicked on. He snatched up Hedwig's cage, dashed to the window, and passed it out to Ron. He was scrambling back onto the chest of drawers when Uncle Vernon hammered on the unlocked door, and it crashed open. For a split second, Uncle Vernon stood framed in the doorway. Then he let out a bellow like an angry bull and dived at Harry, grabbing him by the ankle. Ron, Fred, and George seized Harry's arms and pulled as hard as they could. "Petunia!" roared Uncle Vernon. "He's getting away! He's getting away!" But the Weasleys gave a gigantic tug, and Harry's legs slid out of Uncle Vernon's grasp. Harry was in the car. He had slammed the door shut. "Put your foot down, Fred!" yelled Ron, and the car shot suddenly toward the moon. Harry couldn't believe it. He was free. He rolled down the window, the night air whipping his hair, and looked back at the shrinking rooftops of Privet Drive. Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and Dudley were all hanging dumbstruck out of Harry's window. "See you next summer," Harry yelled. The Weasleys roared with laughter, and Harry settled back into his seat, grinning from ear to ear. "Let Hedwig out," he told Ron. "She can fly behind us. She hasn't had a chance to stretch her wings for ages." George handed the hairpin to Ron, and a moment later, Hedwig soared joyfully out of the window to glide alongside them like a ghost. "So, what's the story, Harry?" said Ron impatiently. "What's been happening?" Harry told them all about Dobby, the warning he'd given Harry, and the fiasco of the violet pudding. There was a long, shocked silence when he had finished. "Very fishy," said Fred finally. "Definitely dodgy," agreed George. "So he wouldn't even tell you who's supposed to be plotting all this stuff?" "I don't think he could," said Harry. "I told you, every time he got close to letting something slip, he started banging his head against the wall." He saw Fred and George look at each other. "What, you think he was lying to me?" said Harry. "Well," said Fred, "put it this way. House elves have got powerful magic of their own, but they can't usually use it without their master's permission. I reckon old Dobby was sent to stop you coming back to Hogwarts. Someone's idea of a joke. Can you think of anyone at school with a grudge against you?" "Yes," said Harry and Ron together instantly. "Draco Malfoy," Harry explained. "He hates me." "Draco Malfoy," said George, turning around. "Not Lucius Malfoy's son." "Must be. It's not a very common name, is it?" said Harry. "Why?" "I've heard Dad talking about him," said George. "He was a big supporter of you-know-who." "And when you-know-who disappeared," said Fred, craning around to look at Harry, "Lucius Malfoy came back saying he'd never meant any of it. Load of dung. Dad reckons he was right and you-know-who's in a circle." He was. Which is interesting because, well, it's interesting that they talk about how Dobby might have been lying, he might have been sent by his master. What they don't know is Dobby actually is Draco Malfoy's master. Dobby belongs to the Malfoy family, so even though that's not the case here, it could have been the case if they had known. If they had known that that was Malfoy's house elf, they probably would have assumed that he was lying. Harry had heard these rumors about Malfoy's family before, and they didn't surprise him at all. Malfoy made Dudley Dursley look like a kind, thoughtful, and sensitive boy. "I don't know whether the Malfoys own a house elf," said Harry. "They do, and it's Dobby." "Well, whoever owns him will be an old wizarding family, and they'll be rich," said Fred. "Yeah, Mum's always wishing we had a house elf to do the ironing," said George. "But all we've got is a lousy old ghoul in the attic, and gnomes all over the garden. House elves come with a big old manors and castles and places like that. You wouldn't catch one in our house." Harry was silent. Judging by the fact that Draco Malfoy usually had the best of everything, his family was rolling in wizard gold. He could just see Malfoy strutting around a large manor house. Sending the family servant to stop Harry from going back to Hogwarts also sounded exactly like the sort of thing Malfoy would do. Had Harry been stupid to take Dobby seriously? I think it's interesting how Molly Weasley offhand casually says, "Man, I wish I had a house elf. Man, I wish I had a slave." Like, you have to remember that, like, in the wizarding world, it's not slavery to them, it's normal. But from Harry's perspective, or from, a non-wizarding world perspective, it seems cruel. It's like, really? Like, you're okay with slavery? Essentially, they're accepting slavery. And It's just interesting. Like, even good people like the Weasleys are perfectly okay with slavery, essentially, not realizing what it is. Of course, though, our main characters will realize it more later. When they actually get to know, house elves and actually get to see the effects of them. Hermione in particular. Of course, Hermione grew up with Muggles as well, so her idea of slavery is different than if she had lived in the magical world. That's why she doesn't automatically accept house elf slavery. She believes that it's wrong, which of course it is. Yeah, she will help them see the error of their ways later. She'll be annoying about it first, though. I'm glad we came to get you anyway, said Ron. I was getting really worried when you didn't answer any of my letters. I thought it was Errol's fault at first. Who's Errol? Our owl. He's ancient. It wouldn't be the first time he's collapsed on a delivery. So then I tried to borrow Hermes. Who? The owl Mum and Dad bought Percy when he was made prefect, said Fred from the front. But Percy wouldn't lend him to me, said Ron. Said he needed him. Percy's been acting very oddly this summer, said George, frowning, and he has been sending a lot of letters and spending a load of time shut up in his room. I mean, there's only so many times you can polish a prefect badge. This is actually a clue, sort of. This is like a minor plot line that you don't see in the movie, almost. You almost don't see it. Percy is actually going to be a red herring, I think, as to who the heir of Slytherin is. We're going to have a couple of red herrings. But Percy is actually going to be a red herring for who the heir of Slytherin is. I don't know if anybody actually believes Percy is the heir of Slytherin, but he's pretty suspicious throughout the book. And this is the first thing that you see about his suspicious behavior. And you do see a little bit of it in the movie. A little bit. You do see him wandering around the corridors around the Slytherin common room, which why would he be down there in the first place, even though they don't question it in the movie at all. And of course we know what he's actually up to. It's not actually anything suspicious at all. He actually has a girlfriend, Penelope Clearwater. And that's who he's talking to. He's writing letters to her and whatnot. And that's why he was wandering the corridors at night, because he was going to see her. Also, he's a prefect, so you can kind of make an excuse for that, I guess. And you see him with Penelope in the movie, actually. It's very casual, very sly. The camera's just panning throughout the corridor, and you have nearly headless Nick after he's been unpetrified. And he sees Percy, and he was like, "Hello, Percy, Miss Clearwater." They're walking together. His girlfriend actually is in the movie. If only for a brief moment. You're driving too far west, Fred, he added, pointing at a compass on the dashboard. Fred twiddled the steering wheel. So does your dad know you've got the car? Said Harry, guessing the answer. No, said Ron. He had to work tonight. Hopefully we'll be able to get it back in the garage without Mum noticing we flew it. What does your dad do at the Ministry of Magic anyway? He works in the most boring department, said Ron. The Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. The what? It's all to do with bewitching things that are Muggle-made, in case they end up back in a Muggle shop or house. Like last year, some old witch died and a tea set was sold to an antique shop. This Muggle woman bought it, took it home, and tried to serve a friend's tea in it. It was a nightmare. Dad was working overtime for weeks. What happened? The teapot went berserk and squirted boiling tea all over the place, and one man ended up in the hospital with the sugar tongs clamped to his nose. Dad was going frantic. It's only him and an old warlock called Perkins in the office, and they had to do memory charms and all sorts of stuff to cover it up. But your dad, this car... Fred laughed. Yeah, Dad's crazy about everything to do with Muggles. Our shed's full of Muggle stuff. He takes it apart, puts spells on it, and puts it back together again. If he raided our house, he'd have to put himself under arrest. It drives Mum mad. That's the main road, said George, peering down through the windshield. We'll be there in 10 minutes. Just as well, it's getting light. A faint pinkish glow was visible along the horizon on the east. Fred brought the car lower, and Harry saw a dark patchwork of fields and clumps of trees. "We're a little way outside the village," said George. "Ottery St. Catchpole." Britain and their weird names. I don't know if that's a real place or not, but it definitely sounds like it. Ottery St. Catchpole. Lower and lower went the flying car. The edge of a brilliant red sun was now gleaming through the trees. "Touchdown," said Fred, as, with a slight bump, they hit the ground. They had landed next to a tumble-down garage in a small yard, and Harry looked out for the first time at Ron's house. Very first time being at Ron's house. We're going to come here often. It looked as though it had once been a large stone pig pen, but extra rooms had been added here and there until it was several stories high, and so crooked it looked as though it were held up by magic, which, Harry reminded himself, it probably was. Ooh, this would be fun to build in The Sims 4. I might want to do that. I know other people have done it, but I might want to give it a go. Might be fun. 4 or 5 chimneys were perched on top of the red roof. A lopsided sign stuck in the ground near the entrance read, "The Burrow." Around the front door lay a jumble of rubber boots and a very rusty cauldron. Several fat brown chickens were pecking their way around the yard. "It's not much," said Ron. "It's wonderful," said Harry happily, thinking of Privet Drive, which is a stark contrast, which is exactly what J.K. Rowling intended. These two families are completely unalike. The Dursleys and the Weasleys. They got out of the car. "Now we'll go upstairs really quietly," said Fred, "and wait for Mum to call us for breakfast. Then, Ron, you come bounding downstairs going, 'Bum, look who turned up in the night,' and she'll be all pleased to see Harry and no one need ever know we flew the car." Yeah, right. That's not gonna work. No way. "Right," said Ron. "Come on, Harry. I sleep at the top." Ron had gone a nasty greenish color, his eyes fixed on the house. The other 3 wheeled around. Mrs. Weasley was marching across the yard, scattering chickens, and for a short, plump, kind-faced woman, it was remarkable how much she looked like a saber-toothed tiger. "Ah," said Fred. "Oh dear," said George. Mrs. Weasley came to a halt in front of them, her hands on her hips, staring from one guilty face to the next. She was wearing a flowered apron with a wand sticking out of the pocket. "So," she said. "Morning, Mum," said George, in what he clearly thought was a jaunty, winning voice. "Have you any idea how worried I've been?" said Mrs. Weasley in a deadly whisper. "Sorry, Mum, but see, we had to—" All 3 of Mrs. Weasley's sons were taller than she was, but they cowered as her rage broke over them. "Bed's empty, no note, car gone, could have crashed, out of my mind with worry. Did you care? Never, as long as I've lived. You wait till your father gets home. We never had trouble like this from Bill, or Charlie, or Percy." "Perfect Percy," muttered Fred. "You could do with taking a leaf out of Percy's book," yelled Mrs. Weasley, prodding a finger in Fred's chest. "You could have died. You could have been seen. You could have lost your father his job." It seemed to go on for hours. Mrs. Weasley had shouted herself hoarse before she turned on Harry, who backed away. "I'm very pleased to see you, Harry, dear," she said. "Come in and have some breakfast." That whole thing about never had these problems with Bill and Charlie, and never do that. If you're a parent, never do that with your kids, ever. Don't compare your kids. Don't do that. It's quite damaging. I know from personal experience. She turned and walked back into the house, and Harry, after a nervous glance at Ron, who nodded encouragingly, followed her. The kitchen was small and rather cramped. There was a scrubbed wooden table and chairs in the middle, and Harry sat down on the edge of his seat, looking around. He had never been in a wizard house before. The clock on the wall opposite him had only one hand and no numbers at all. Written around the edge were things like, "Time to make tea," "Time to feed the chickens," and "You're late." Books were stacked 3 deep on the mantelpiece, books with titles like "Charm Your Own Cheese," "Enchantment in Baking," and "1-Minute Feasts. It's Magic." And unless Harry's ears were deceiving him, the old radio next to the sink had just announced that coming up was Witching Hour with the popular singing sorceress Celestina Warbeck, Molly Weasley's favorite singer. Mrs. Weasley was clattering around, cooking breakfast a little haphazardly, throwing dirty looks at her sons as she threw sausages. Oh, also, you'll hear me talk about this a lot, making comparisons between books. The pyramid, I like to call it. The pyramid. The way that J.K. Rowling wrote the books is you're supposed to make parallels between certain books. You're supposed to make parallels between 1, 4, and 7, 2 and 6, and 3 and 5. 2 and 6, this is an instance. Harry goes to the Burrow frequently. He goes to the Burrow. It's not strictly going to the Burrow that the comparison's to be made, but we just mentioned Celestina Warbeck. The next time we hear about her, I think, is Half-Blood Prince. Half-Blood Prince connection. Mrs. Weasley was I read that. How far did I get? I'll just read again. Mrs. Weasley was clattering around, cooking breakfast a little haphazardly, throwing dirty looks at her sons as she threw sausages into the frying pan. Every now and then she muttered things like, "Don't know what you were thinking of," and "Never would have believed it." "I don't blame you, dear," she assured Harry, tipping 8 or 9 sausages onto his plate. "Arthur and I have been worried about you, too. Just last night we were saying we'd come and get you ourselves if you hadn't written back to Ron by Friday. But really," she was now adding 3 fried eggs to his plate, "flying an illegal car halfway across the country. Anyone could have seen you." She flicked her wand casually at the dishes in the sink, which began to clean themselves, clinking gently in the background. "It was cloudy, Mum," said Fred. "You keep your mouth closed while you're eating," Mrs. Weasley snapped. "They were starving him, Mum," said George. "And you," said Mrs. Weasley, but it was with a slightly softened expression that she started cutting Harry bread and buttering it for him. At that moment there was a diversion in the form of a small, red-headed figure in a long nightdress, who appeared in the kitchen, gave a small squeal, and ran out again. Can you imagine going downstairs for breakfast and finding Harry Potter at your dinner table? Can you imagine? Don't do that. I'm going to faint. Oh my goodness. What a dream come true that would be. Oh my goodness. Okay. Sorry. This would be me. Ginny Weasley. Oh my goodness. Okay. "Ginny," said Ron in an undertone to Harry. "My sister. She's been talking about you all summer." Sounds like me. That's why her name is in my name for YouTube. I identify with her a lot. "Yeah, she's been wanting your autograph, Harry," Fred said with a grin, but he caught his mother's eye and bent his face over his plate without another word. Nothing more was said until all 4 plates were clean, which took a surprisingly short time. "Blimey, I'm tired," yawned Fred, sitting down his knife and fork at last. "I think I'll go to bed." "And you will not," snapped Mrs. Weasley. "It's your own fault you've been up all night. You're going to de-gnome the garden for me. They're getting completely out of hand again." "Oh, Mum, and you too," she said, glaring at Ron and Fred. "You can go up to bed, dear," she added to Harry. "You didn't ask them to fly that wretched car." But Harry, who felt wide awake, said quickly, "I'll help Ron. I've never seen a de-gnoming." "That's very sweet of you, dear, but it's dull work," said Mrs. Weasley. "Now let's see what Lockhart's got to say on the subject." And she pulled a heavy book from the stack on the mantelpiece. George groaned. "Mum, we know how to de-gnome a garden." I was just thinking, do you really have to consult the book every time? This isn't the first time you've done this. Harry looked at the cover of Mrs. Weasley's book. Written across it in fancy gold letters were the words Gilderoy Lockhart's Guide to Household Pests. There was a big photograph on the front of a very good-looking wizard with wavy blonde hair and bright blue eyes. As always in the wizarding world, the photograph was moving. The wizard, who Harry supposed was Gilderoy Lockhart, kept winking cheekily up at them all. Mrs. Weasley beamed down at him. I just thought of something. Wizarding portraits and pictures, they move. Like, even, like, your family photos and stuff. How weird would that be to have it in your house? I mean, like, I'd be weird, just, like, if I had, like, a picture of my family and they were all moving and smiling and waving at me. I wouldn't want it up in my bedroom or my bathroom. You know, it'd be a little weird. It'd be like undressing in front of them or something. But then again, you'd probably get used to it. If you were in the wizarding world and that was normal for you, you'd probably be used to it and you wouldn't think of them as actually seeing you or anything like that. That's probably true. Oh, he is marvelous, she said. He knows his household pests all right. It's a wonderful book. Mum fancies him, said Fred in a very audible whisper. Don't be so ridiculous, Fred, said Mrs. Weasley, her cheeks rather pink. All right, if you think you know better than Lockhart, you can go and get on with it, and woe betide you if there's a single gnome in that garden when I come out to inspect it. Yawning and grumbling, the Weasleys slouched outside with Harry behind them. The garden was large, and in Harry's eyes exactly what a garden should be. The Dursleys wouldn't have liked it. There were plenty of weeds, and the grass needed cutting, but there were gnarled trees all around the walls, plants Harry had never seen, spilling from every flower bed, and a big green pond full of frogs. Muggles have garden gnomes too, you know, said Harry. Harry told Ron as they crossed the lawn. Yeah, I've seen those things they think are gnomes, said Ron, bent double with his head in a peony bush, like fat little Santa Clauses with fishing rods. There was a violent scuffling noise. The peony bush shuddered, and Ron straightened up. This is a gnome, he said grimly. Get off me! Get off me! Squealed the gnome. Silly gnome. It was certainly nothing like Santa Claus. It was small and leathery looking, with a large, knobby, bald head exactly like a potato. Ron held it at arm's length as it kicked out at him with its horny little feet. He grasped it around the ankles and turned it upside down. This is what you have to do, he said. He raised the gnome above his head. Get off me, and started to swing it in great circles like a lasso. Seeing the shocked look on Harry's face, Ron added, It doesn't hurt them. It doesn't hurt them. You just got to make them really dizzy so they can't find their way back to the gnome holes. Yeah, this always makes me think of the old PlayStation games. I've never played them myself, but I've seen other people play them. And this is actually a game, a puzzle that you have to do in that game, is getting rid of gnomes. It's quite nostalgic. He let go of the gnome's ankles. It flew 20 feet into the air and landed with a thud in the field over the hedge. Pitiful, said Fred. I bet I can get mine beyond that stump. Harry learned quickly not to feel too sorry for the gnomes. He decided just to drop the first one he caught over the hedge, but the gnome, sensing weakness, sank its razor-sharp teeth into Harry's finger, and he had a hard job shaking it off. Until... Wow, Harry, that must have been 50 feet. The air was soon thick with flying gnomes. See, they're not too bright, said George, seizing 5 or 6 gnomes at once. The moment they know the denoming's going on, they storm up to have a look. You'd think they'd have learned by now just to stay put. Soon the crowd of gnomes in the field started walking away in a straggling line, their little shoulders hunched. They'll be back, said Ron as they watched the gnomes disappear into the hedge on the other side of the field. So wait, they're marching themselves out of the garden? On they storm up to have a look. That's such a weird way of putting it. Storm. It's They're walking away in a straggling line, their little shoulders hunched. Yeah, they're walking away. They love it here. Dad's too soft with them. He thinks they're funny. Just then, the front door slammed. "He's back," said George. "Dad's home." They hurried through the garden and back into the house. Mr. Weasley was slumped in a kitchen chair with his glasses off and his eyes closed. He was a thin man, going bald, but the little hair he had was as red as any of his children's. He was wearing long green robes, which were dusty and travel-worn. "What a night," he mumbled, groping for the teapot as they all sat down around him. 9 raids, 9. And old Mundungus Fletcher tried to put a hex on me when I had my back turned. Old Mundungus Fletcher. Mr. Weasley took a long gulp of tea and sighed. "Find anything, Dad?" said Fred eagerly. "All I got were a few shrinking door keys and a biting kettle," yawned Mr. Weasley. "There's some pretty nasty stuff that wasn't my department, though." Mortlake was taken away for questioning about some extremely odd ferrets, but that's the committee on experimental charms, thank goodness. "Why would anyone bother making door keys shrink?" said George. "Just muggle baiting," sighed Mr. Weasley. "Sell them a key that keeps shrinking to nothing so that they can never find it when they need it. Of course, it's very hard to convict anyone because no muggle would admit their key keeps shrinking. They'll insist they just keep losing it. Bless them. They'll go to any lengths to ignore magic, even if it's staring them in the face. But the things all have taken to enchanting, you wouldn't believe. Like cars, for instance?" He has no idea. Mrs. Weasley had appeared, holding a long poker like a sword. Mr. Weasley's eyes jerked open. He stared guiltily at his wife. "Cars, Molly, dear?" "Yes, Arthur, cars," said Mrs. Weasley, her eyes flashing. "Imagine a wizard buying a rusty old car and telling his wife all he wanted to do with it was take it apart to see how it worked, while really he was enchanting it to make it fly." Mr. Weasley blinked. "Well, dear, I think you'll find that he would be quite within the law to do that, even if, he maybe would have done better to, tell his wife the truth. There's a loophole in the law, you'll find. As long as he wasn't intending to fly the car, the fact that the car could fly wouldn't—" "Arthur Weasley, you made sure there was a loophole when you wrote that law," shouted Mrs. Weasley, "just so you could carry on tinkering with all that muggle rubbish in your shed. And for your information, Harry arrived this morning in the car you weren't intending to fly." "Harry?" said Mr. Weasley blankly. "Harry who?" He looked around, saw Harry, and jumped. "Good Lord, is it Harry Potter? Very pleased to meet you. Ron's told us so much about. Your sons flew that car to Harry's house and back last night," chatted Mrs. Weasley. "What have you got to say about that, eh?" "Did you really?" said Mr. Weasley eagerly. "Did it go all right? I mean—" He faltered as sparks flew from Mrs. Weasley's eyes. That was very wrong, boys. Very wrong indeed." "Let's leave them to it," Ron muttered to Harry as Mrs. Weasley swallowed like a bullfrog. "Come on, I'll show you my bedroom." They slipped out of the kitchen and down a narrow passageway to an uneven staircase, which wound its way zigzagging up through the house. On the third landing, a door stood ajar. Harry just caught sight of a pair of bright brown eyes staring at him before it closed with a snap. "Ginny," said Ron, You don't know how weird it is for her to be this shy. She never shuts up normally." They climbed 2 more flights until they reached a door with peeling paint and a small plaque on it, saying, "Ronald's room." Harry stepped in, his head almost touching the sloping ceiling, and blinked. It was like walking into a furnace. Nearly everything in Ron's room seemed to be a violent shade of orange. The bedspread, the walls, even the ceiling. Then Harry realized that Ron had covered nearly every inch of the shabby wallpaper with posters of the same 7 witches and wizards, all wearing bright orange robes, carrying broomsticks, and waving energetically. "No Quidditch team?" said Harry. "The Chudley Cannons," said Ron, pointing at the orange bedspread, which was emblazoned with 2 giant black C's and a speeding cannonball, 9th in the league. You can actually buy Chudley Cannon paraphernalia, which is kind of cool. Ron's school spellbooks were stacked untidily in a corner next to a pile of comics that all seemed to feature the adventures of Martin Miggs, the Mad Muggle. Ron's magic wand was lying on top of a fish tank full of frog spawn on the windowsill next to his fat gray rat Scabbers, who was snoozing in a patch of sun. Harry stepped over a pack of self-shuffling playing cards on the floor and looked out of the tiny window. In the field far below he could see a gang of gnomes sneaking one by one back through the Weasley's hedge. Then he turned to look at Ron, who was watching him almost nervously, as though waiting for his opinion. "It's a bit small," said Ron quickly. "Not like that room you had with the Muggles. And I'm right underneath the ghoul in the attic. He's always banging on the pipes and groaning." But Harry grinned widely and said, "This is the best house I've ever been in." Ron's ears went pink. Yay. And that's the end of that chapter. So next time we will read chapter 4 at Flourish and Blots, and chapter 5, which is, can we get to Hogwarts, please? The books never really get going until you get to Hogwarts. The Whomping Willow, that one's pretty good. But we won't get to Hogwarts till chapter 6, as usual. Okay. So not yet. Next week, chapters 4 and 5. Very exciting. Okay. So that is it for the stream. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a comment down below if you're watching the video after the fact. And please leave a like on the stream as well. It helps, tells YouTube that you like it, and it's more likely to share it with other people the more likes that it gets. And if you'd like more content like this, please click subscribe and click the notification bell next to that so you can be notified the next time I go live and the next time I upload. I will be going live Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I'll be playing The Sims 4, and then again on Friday playing Sherlock Holmes, The Testament of Sherlock, and then again on Saturday for chapters 4 and 5 of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Follow me on Twitter if you like. It'll help. I give out information on streams, and sometimes if I have to cancel streams and stuff like that, you'll get all the information there. Link in the description. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a magical evening. Bye-bye.